Hello again, fellow Mystery Files. Today I will be ranking my top 10 Agatha Christie novels by how much they need an adaptation, or more accurately, a new adaptation. I feel like we always get the same few novels just adapted again and again. There are like hundreds of adaptations of Agatha Christie works out there, and there are quite a few clunkers as well, and also some novels that just need some more love. I swear, I'm going to scream if there are any more adaptations of Murder on the Orient Express. We have multiple film, TV shows, parodies, plays, video games of this book. I'm getting tired of it. I get why they do it, but I need something else. And this is all hypothetical exercise here, of course. I'm generally referring to cinematic adaptations I would like to see. There are no spoilers in this video for either books or existing adaptations, but before I begin, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. If you're new to the channel, make sure you check out some of my past videos. I always try to respond to comments no matter how old the videos are, so if I see it, I will try to get back to you. Starting out with a few honorable mentions, a lot of thriller novels I think would make decent adaptations. I think thrillers are more enjoyable on film than in print, and I also don't mind these books undergoing like substantial changes. Now, I don't really need adaptations of any of these books, which is why they didn't make the list, but I think we could get like good adaptations and flashy ones, which is where I think like the film and TV industry is really going these days. They like the big sort of flashy plot points. So the likes of like The Secret Adversary, The Big Four, The Seven Dials Mystery, One Two Buckle My Shoe, Enter M, At Bertram's Hotel, all have existing adaptations, but I think they could be fun to see again on a larger scale, but they just simply didn't make the list. No Miss Marple book made the list, but I did consider Nemesis as I think that's probably like the Marple book most in need of a new film adaptation. The ITV Marple version was atrocious, and the BBC one with Joan Hickson was fine, but not particularly good compared to the others from that series. Towards Zero and Ordeal by Innocence both have somewhat mediocre adaptations, with by Innocence having just like an awful one recently that exacerbated the worst qualities of the book. They didn't make the list because I just don't have faith we'd actually get like good versions of them. And the ITV Marple versions of those books were passable enough. Endless Night is another one. There is a film version that I've never seen, but the reviews were awful. But I do actually enjoy the ITV Marple adaptation, so I didn't put it on the list. Two Poirots that didn't make the cut were The Murder of Roger Ackroyd and Hercule Poirot's Christmas. Two novels, the David Suchet Poirot series left me unsatisfied, but I think they lack like the flashier aspects that make me fear they'd undergo like substantial changes, and I really don't want Kenneth Branagh getting hold of either of them. And the final honorable mention is And Then There Were None, which I know has a lot of very good adaptations, but I'm always up for a good adaptation of this book. It never gets old to me, but there are plenty out there that I'd rather see like 10 other novels get the special treatment for once. Starting out at number 10, a novel that's really just on this list, quite frankly, because it's one of three Christie novels without an adaptation, and that is Passenger to Frankfurt. And I guess this book does have adaptational potential. I've never really found much sense in this book, but things can be rearranged and put together into a coherent thriller film. Like I said earlier, I think the thrillers just have film potential, and I don't mind things being rearranged too much. I just can't imagine an adaptation of Passenger to Frankfurt to be worse than the book or somehow ruin the book because it's pretty bad already. Now, am I like really hankering for this? No, but I would like to see every Christie novel adapted, and that includes this one, which is why I have it at the bottom of the list here at number 10. At number 9 is the beginning of a small streak of some of my favorite Poirot novels that only have like mediocre adaptations. And the first of these is Taken at the Flood. And I simply don't like the David Suchet Poirot adaptation of this book. It strips out everything that made the book good, in my opinion. My one concern here is that, first off, this is one of like the lesser known Poirot books, and it lacks the flashiness I think producers, writers, and directors look for when selecting books to adapt. They could play off the psychological aspects and the relationships, but there probably are like better Christies for that. This also is one where Poirot is kind of extraneous. I think he'd probably be omitted or his role expanded, which upsets the character dynamics either way. I mean, Taken the Flood is such a good picture in time of post-war Britain and has fantastic dynamics between the characters and a really fantastic mystery. It has, love stories which are popular in films. I do fear this one is sort of ripe to be torn asunder if Kenneth Branagh gets his hands on it, so let's hope not there. But I personally think this book needs a good adaptation, so I have it here at number 9. At number 8 is a book I mentioned in a previous video that needed a new adaptation, and that is Peril at End House. And I love the Suchet adaptation of this book. It was the first full-length novel the show adapted, but that was in 1990, 34 years ago. I think this is a criminally underrated book, and I would love for a new Christie adaptation of this to introduce Christie fans to this book in particular. I think it has a perfect plot for an adaptation as action, adventure, mystery, suspense, humor, love. I don't think many changes need to be made, although I suppose minor changes are necessary to differentiate itself from the Suchet episodes. Naturally, I don't want Kenneth Branagh anywhere near this book. I think the role of Nick Buckley really could be a standout role for either like an up and coming actress or an already established actress. I would think it's a role many would want. I don't have it higher on the list because I do like the Susei adaptation. Peril at House does have an existing good adaptation and some foreign language ones I should mention, but I honestly I haven't seen any of them, so I can't comment on their quality. I do think it needs to be out in the front more, so I have Peril at House here at number 8. At number 7, the final Poirot in this little streak here is another of my favorites, After the Funeral. And we have two English language adaptations of this book, and both of them are pretty terrible. And one of them is Margaret Rutherford, Miss Marple, called Murder at the Gala because of reasons. And the other is the David Suchet Poirot, which left the plot largely the same, but it changed the characters and the setting in ways I just didn't like. Again, I think the plot of this book is right for a movie, sans Kenneth Branagh, of course. It has everything that I think works. Now, there is an issue involving impersonations that could be a factor, but a big budget film or mini series really shouldn't have an issue with that. There are certainly fair ways around it, and I need an adaptation of After the Funeral that captures the chaotic family dynamics of the Abernathys and captures the pain and the suffering of post World War II England in times of like food rationing and high taxation. The adaptations lacked these things, and I think the murder mystery falls flat without them because they're so connected and intertwined with the plot. They're the main motivators for the murder. And unfortunately, those things are elements typically cut from adaptations for time and financial and creative purposes. But I think After the Funeral needs them, and I want to see it happen. So I have that book here at number 7. At number 6, and boy, did I think I would never talk about this book again, but here I have Postern of Fate, the final Tommy and Tuppence, and the final novel Christie wrote. This has never been adapted for pretty obvious reasons. I mean, the plot doesn't make sense in many places, and there just like isn't a substantial plot here. But I think you could piece together elements of the plot into a coherent story with substantial additions that I don't think anyone would mind. Really, if a filmmaker wanted to do a Christie and not care about remaining true to the original work, this is the book to pick. No one is going to care about not remaining faithful to the original text. In general, I think Tommy and Tuppence are in need of sort of a relaunch. I know there was one a few years ago, but it wasn't well advertised, and quite frankly, I didn't care for him. And I'd also like to add that both Francesca Annis and James Warwick, who played Tommy and Tuppence in the 80s, are both still around and still acting. It would be a lot of fun to see them reunited as the Beresfords. In terms of plot, I think you could keep the decades old war spy murder thing, maybe bring it up in time so it's like World War II instead of World War One. And I think it would be interesting if like one of the Beresfords, namely Tuppence, did have some sort of dementia and they undertake this mystery they stumble into to relive the old times. I think a lot of good can be done with this story, and I would like to see it actually. So I have Postern of Fate here at number 6. At number five is a novel that was absolutely butchered beyond recognition in the one English language adaptation we have of it, and that is The Sitterford Mystery. And there are only three novels that haven't been adapted yet, and to be honest, I would consider this one a fourth. I mean, the ITV Marple just completely slaughtered this book to the point that it was just totally unrecognizable, and I'm not sure why, because this book is clearly adaptable. Now, I think characters would have to be cut, and they're just too many and production costs would run high. It's too many people anyway, but I think a lot of people can be chopped out of here without having to like rearrange the story much. I think maybe the motive stakes need to be upped. While I think it works for the book, I think a modern audience, especially one full of people who probably aren't familiar with the Sitter for Mystery, would feel unsatisfied by it. But I think just like a slight upping of the stakes might be warranted. I also think some of the cluing needs to be changed. In particular, this book has a great clue, and I won't spoil it, but it involves the receiving of money. And if you're familiar with the book, you know what I'm talking about. That I think might just be like a little obvious in a visual format. But these are minor changes, easily made. I think the opening seance sequence is like an instant attention grabber. And we have like the big snowstorm that's always a favorite in movies. I think the Citizen Mystery is in desperate need of a true adaptation worthy of doing the book justice, so I have it here at number five. Number four is a book that has three adaptations, and all of them are pretty bad, and that is The Pale Horse. And The Pale Horse was first adapted in 1996 for an ITV TV film that is probably the best of these three, but it's just fine. It does some pretty strange things, and then we have the ITV Marple adaptation, which you could expect is not good. It makes a number of unnecessary changes, but at least it tries. It fails, but it tries. And then we have what I would consider the worst of this trio, the BBC 2019 miniseries. And the least said about that, the better. I don't understand why adaptations of this book continue to flop. And you can play up the spooky atmosphere, the almost supernatural nature of it. I think there are many approaches to this novel. Again, characters probably have to be cut. There are a lot that don't contribute much. I've just been so disappointed by adaptations of this book that I want like a really satisfying one. I think filmmakers get caught up in like the strangeness of the book and took that as liberty to do whatever they wanted. But Christie is very controlled in this book, and I think a filmmaker needs to resist the temptation of making it weirder than it already is. Play up the spookiness for sure, but do it in a refined, restrained manner while staying true to the characters and the mystery at hand. I mean, what the BBC series did with Mark Easterbrook was just so unnecessary and so incongruous to the plot. I mean, The Pale Horse is the kind of book whose adaptation might appeal to viewers who don't like mysteries, but love like the supernatural and suspense films. So I have it here at number four. At number three is a book on similar lines when you think of it, and that is By the Pricking of My Thumbs. And this one does have an ITV Marple adaptation that I don't think is actually like that bad, but it needs an adaptation without Miss Marple, one that is true to the book. Tommy was barely in it, and it needs to be a true Tommy and Tuppence production. A lot of the humor from the book was dispensed. The opening passages of this book are fantastic, with Mrs. Lancaster and Tuppence in the nursing home. I mean, this is like an instant hook. I could see that scene gripping viewers in during like promos and trailers. And this is mostly a thriller, so they have all that like shenanigans that I think just works better in visual than in print. And Tuppence gets hit on the head, and there's a lot of like moving around. I think an adaptation probably needs a body on screen though, and a tighter ending. The motive probably needs a change as well, but I mean, again, this is a thriller, so I wouldn't mind like larger changes than in a traditional murder mystery. And again, James Warwick and Francesca Annis are both still around. They're maybe a little too old for this book, but I think they could pull it off. They are too old for NRM, which probably should have made this list now that I think of it, but By the Pricking of My Thumbs is the kind of story I think has just more appeal to a broader audience than like a World War II thriller like NRM, where there are so many of those already. And this one has that like really great scene in the beginning that could be an instant showstopper. So I have it here at number three. At number two is a Poirot novel that has some very infamously bad adaptations, and that is Appointment with Death. And this book has a few adaptations, like I said. It was the final Peter Ustinov Poirot, and as much as I adore Peter Ustinov's Poirot, I hated this movie. It was awful. It was overly campy, and you could tell that like after six films, everyone involved just stopped caring. And then we have the David Suchet Poirot, which I think is probably the worst episode of the entire series. It's terrible. I have no idea what they were doing here. And there are other adaptations as well, including one from the 1950s TV show Danger, which I've never seen, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say that's the best one of these. I don't know why this book can't have a good adaptation. The mystery is good. The setting is international. That's usually a big attention grabber. I mean, it can't be filmed in Syria now, but that's never stopped a film being, produced before. And I think maybe the plot lacks sort of like the flashiness a filmmaker might want, but you could certainly play up the psychological suspense. I would prefer the original ending be kept, but it is worth mentioning that the play of this book, which Christie wrote herself, has a different ending that I love and I think is also a potential option worth pursuing. I really thought Kenneth Branagh would visit this book after Death on the Nile, as it only seemed like the next logical step. They're in the same place, and the books are, sort of. They're not like it's not a sequel to Death on the Nile, but it does take place chronologically immediately after. Not that I want Kenneth Branagh adapting anything else, but this is where I thought he would go. But this book is almost 80 years old and still has no worthy adaptation in English, at least, and it deserves one. So I have Appointment with Death here at number two. And at number one, I have the last remaining unadapted book to talk about, and that is Death Comes as the End. There was supposed to be an adaptation of this book, I believe, and it was canceled for unknown reasons, and that's a shame. I mean, of the three remaining Christie books not adapted, this is the only true mystery novel among them. I can't believe someone hasn't grabbed this up yet. I don't know if, race is a factor because the cast should be 100% black. This is set in ancient Egypt, and I don't know if that was an issue for someone. Now, to be quite frank, even like 15 years ago, this film would have had like white people playing ancient Egyptians, but just imagine the magnificent set and the costumes this adaptation would have. More than any other Christie, this would certainly have just, wonderful sets and costumes, potentially Oscar bait. Now, nothing really needs to be changed. I mean, this book has never been done before, so I think the first adaptation should remain as faithful as possible, as a very high body count, which is certain to keep people's attention. It gives the audience what they want. Now, I hope the BBC decides to revitalize this project, although, given what the BBC did to recent adaptations, perhaps some other body should take over. But it's truly a tragedy this book remains unadapted in any language. There are no foreign language adaptations of this book either. Truly a crime, and Death Comes as the End finishes here at number one. And that is it for this video. Now, there are quite a bit of foreign language adaptations of Christie that are pretty good. I enjoyed the Japanese anime, Agatha Christie's Great Detectives, Poirot and Marple. I also enjoyed the few episodes of the French series, Les Petits Meurtres d'Agatha Christie, but I haven't seen like too many of those. The infamous Russian version of And Then There Were None is, interesting, and I may cover these in future sometime, but next week, I'm staying on the subject of adaptations with my top 10 mystery novels by other authors in need of adaptations or new adaptations. And let me know in the comments which Christie novels you think need to be adapted or adapted again. I'm also going to start putting some polls up on occasion. Right now, I'm planning a Valentine's Day double feature where I'll review two novels themed appropriately. Death on the Nile, which has a lot of matchmaking going on, will be one. The second spot is close as of right now. It's a tie between Artist in Crime and the Poison Chocolates case, with Strong Poison close behind. So make sure to vote if you haven't yet. I may post a tiebreaker poll if necessary. I'll also allow you guys to vote on which author or detective's novels I will rank next. Marjorie Allingham and Albert Campion are next, probably coming out at the end of February, but after that, authors will be selected by you, so keep your eyes out for that. Until next time, Mystery Files.